I was sitting on my balcony in Porto, watching the sun go down over the Douro River, drinking coffee that cost me 80 cents, when my phone rang. It was my son Marcus. He was crying, and the first thing I thought was, not again. Not after everything. But then he said 4 words that stopped me cold. Dad, you were right. I hadn't spoken to Marcus in 9 months. 9 months of silence from the boy I coached in Little League, drove to SAT prep at 6 in the morning, helped move into his first apartment in Charlotte. 9 months because he stood in my kitchen in the house I built, and told me that Richard was successful, stable, and everything I apparently was not. I put down my coffee, I looked out at the river, and I said, "Tell me what happened, son." So let me back up, because you need to understand where I was before you can understand where I am now. My name is Walter. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years married to a woman named Diane. We built a life together in Raleigh, North Carolina, a good life on paper. 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood off Falls of Noosh Road. 2 kids, Marcus and our daughter Tanya. I worked in commercial real estate, nothing glamorous but steady. Diane taught elementary school for the first 12 years, then stopped working when her mother got sick and never really went back. I want to be careful here, because this is not a story about hating Diane. I don't hate Diane. I think I stopped understanding her somewhere around year 18, and I think she stopped trying somewhere around year 22, and by year 28 we were just 2 people sharing a house and a last name and a mutual agreement not to talk about anything that mattered. What I did not know, what I did not find out until much later, was that Diane had been talking to Richard Colton for at least 4 of those last years. Richard Colton. I want you to get a picture of this man. He is 58 years old. He owns 3 car dealerships in the Research Triangle area. He wears a lot of gold. He talks about his net worth the way some men talk about the weather, constantly, casually, like everyone around him is just as interested in it as he is. He and Diane had apparently reconnected through a mutual friend at some church fundraiser in 2021. And what started as a friendly conversation became, over time, something I was not part of. I found out the way a lot of men my age find out. Not dramatically, not with lipstick on a collar or a suspicious text message. I found out because one afternoon I came home early from a site visit in Durham, and Diane was on the back porch on the phone, and when she heard the door she ended the call so fast that she fumbled her phone onto the deck. And she looked at me the way you look at someone when you've been caught. Not doing something specific, just caught being somewhere else entirely, even while standing right in front of you. I didn't say anything that day. I just went inside and made dinner. But I started paying attention. Over the next few weeks, I noticed things I'd probably been too busy or too comfortable to notice before. She had changed her phone passcode. She was going to the gym at odd hours. She started buying clothes I'd never seen her wear. Small things, the kind of things that, individually, mean nothing. But together, they told a story. I went to see a lawyer in February of 2022, not because I had proof of anything, but because I am 60 years old and I have learned that when something feels wrong, it usually is, and the time to prepare is before the storm, not during it. The lawyer's name was Patricia Hewitt. She is sharp, direct, and she did not waste my time. She told me exactly what to document, what not to say, and what my rights were regarding our shared assets. We had the house, which we'd owned since 1998. We had 2 retirement accounts. We had a joint savings account, and we had a small investment property in Wake Forest that we'd purchased in 2017 and rented out. I want you to remember that investment property. It matters later. I filed for divorce in April of 2022. Diane was not surprised. I think part of her was relieved. We were both tired. The process was painful, the way any amputation is painful, not because you want to keep the limb, but because the cutting itself is brutal. What I did not expect was Marcus. Tanya, my daughter, she called me the day I told her. She cried. I cried. She told me she loved me and that she would always be my daughter, no matter what. That phone call took 45 minutes, and I remember every word of it. Marcus called me 3 days later. He was calm, too calm, and he said something I have turned over in my mind probably 500 times since. He said, "Dad, I understand you're going through something, but Mom's been through a lot too. And the way you handled this, just filing, no warning, no attempt at counseling, I think that says something about where your priorities are." I asked him what his mother had told him. He said, "Enough." I did not push. I told him I loved him. He said he loved me too, and then we hung up and I sat in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter for 20 minutes before I could drive. The divorce was finalized in September of 2022. The house went on the market. We split the retirement accounts, the investment property in Wake Forest. Diane's attorney pushed hard for her to keep it as part of the settlement, and because I had other assets and I was tired of fighting, I let it go. I want to stop on that for a moment. I let it go because I was exhausted, and because I trusted that the process was fair, and because I did not know, I could not have known, what Diane was planning to do with it. More on that in a minute. I moved into a short-term rental in Cary while I figured out my next step. I was 61 years old. I had spent my entire adult life in North Carolina. My work was there. My roots were there. My grandkids were there. Tanya has 2 little ones, a girl and a boy, 6 and 4 at the time. And I spent about 3 months in that rental asking myself a question I hadn't asked since I was 22 years old. What do I actually want? Not what makes sense. Not what's responsible. Not what people expect from a recently divorced grandfather in his early 60s. What do I want? The answer surprised me. I had been to Portugal once in 2014 for a conference in Lisbon. I'd had 3 free days afterward, and I'd wandered around like a man who'd forgotten he had a body. The light there is different. I don't know how else to say it. The city is old and unhurried, and the food is extraordinary, and I sat at an outdoor restaurant and had grilled fish and a glass of local wine for 11 euros, and I remember thinking, people just live like this? Every day? I went back to that memory a lot in those 3 months in Cary. In January of 2023, I booked a one-way flight to Porto. I want to tell you about Porto because this is the part that people always ask about and the part that the story usually glosses over. Porto is a city of about 250,000 people, built on steep hills above the Douro River in northern Portugal. It is old. Parts of it are genuinely medieval, and it is beautiful in a way that doesn't try too hard. It doesn't look like a city that knows how beautiful it is, and that's part of what I love about it. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bonfim neighborhood for 900 euros a month, which if you do the conversion is around $980. I was paying $1,800 a month for my rental in Cary, and that wasn't anything special. In Porto, I had exposed wooden beams and a view of a hillside and a bakery on the corner where I became a regular within the first 2 weeks. My monthly expenses in Porto, rent, food, transportation, utilities, everything ran about $20,100 a month. I was living on my Social Security and drawing a modest amount from my retirement savings. I was not rich, but for the first time in years I was not pinched either. I had room to breathe. I started walking every morning along the riverfront. I took a Portuguese language class on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at a small school near the Bulhau Market. My teacher was a patient woman named Fernanda, who was in her 70s and found my accent deeply amusing. I made friends. A retired British engineer named Graham, who lived 2 blocks away, a couple from Ohio who'd made the same leap I had, a local man named Hector who ran a small hardware store and insisted on teaching me card games I still don't fully understand. I was, for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, content. And then, in March, my old colleague Dennis from back in Raleigh sent me a text message. It said, "Walter, did you know Diane and Richard are engaged? Announcements all over Facebook. Thought you should hear it from someone who actually knows you." I set my phone down. I will be honest with you. It stung. Not because I wanted Diane back, I did not, but because the speed of it confirmed what I had suspected during those last quiet years of our marriage. This had not been something that happened after we separated. This had been waiting in the background for a long time. I called Patricia Hewitt the next morning. I wasn't sure why. Something just told me to. Call it instinct. Call it the discipline of an old man who's learned to pay attention to the quiet voice in the back of his head. Patricia was glad I called. She had been doing some routine follow-up on our case. She does this sometimes, she told me, just ties up loose ends, and she had noticed something in the public records for Wake County. The investment property in Wake Forest had been sold in November of 2022 for $387,000. Diane had sold it 2 months after our divorce was finalized. Now here is why this matters. During the divorce proceedings, that property had been appraised at $294,000. It was assessed for property tax purposes at $271,000. Diane's attorney had argued and the court had accepted that her keeping the property was a fair offset against other assets I was receiving, but the property had sold for $387,000 more than the divorce settlement had credited it for. Was this illegal? Patricia was careful. She said the valuation had been based on available data at the time. She said that real estate markets move. She said that it would be difficult to prove intentional misrepresentation without more evidence. But she also said, Walter, the timing of that sale is interesting. She listed it in September, the same month the divorce was finalized. That property had been listed for sale the same month we signed the papers. I didn't do anything dramatic with that information. I want to be clear about that. I did not call Diane. I did not confront Richard. I did not post anything on social media or call mutual friends or do any of the things that a part of me, a very human part of me, wanted to do. I went for my morning walk. I had coffee at the bakery. I called Tanya, who already knew about the engagement and had been dreading telling me, and I told her I was okay. I told her I was genuinely okay. She didn't quite believe me, but she appreciated that I said it. Marcus, I did not hear from. The wedding was in June. A Saturday. I knew because Tanya told me. She was invited, she went, she came home with a look on her face that she described to me only as a lot. Marcus was the best man. That I also knew. What I did not know, what Tanya told me only later and quietly, was what had happened at the reception. Richard Colton, it turns out, had given a speech, and in that speech he had talked about Diane's strength, her resilience, the way she had endured a marriage that had, in his words, undervalued her for decades. He talked about how grateful he was to be the man who could finally give her what she deserved. The room applauded. Marcus applauded. And then an older woman stood up at her table, a retired colleague of Diane's from the school where she'd taught, a woman named Beverly who had known us both for 20 years, and Beverly said, very calmly, without raising her voice, I'm happy for you, Diane. I truly am. I just hope you told Richard about the Wake Forest property before you said I do, because some things have a way of coming out. The room went quiet. Diane's face, Tanya told me, did something that was difficult to describe. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was the face of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just heard someone else name exactly what it is. Richard Colton looked at his new wife. Marcus looked at his mother, and Beverly sat back down and picked up her fork. Marcus called me on a Sunday morning in July. I was on my balcony watching the river. He told me that after the reception, Richard had asked Diane directly about the property, that they had fought badly for the first time, that Marcus had found himself in the middle of conversations he didn't know how to navigate, hearing things about the timeline of Diane and Richard's relationship that made him uncomfortable, and then making a phone call to a real estate attorney friend of his who had pulled the public records and walked Marcus through exactly what had happened. My son is not a stupid man. He is stubborn, and he had sided with his mother because she had been the one in front of him, the one asking for his support, the one telling the story. And he is her son, and I understand that, and I do not blame him for it entirely. But he called me in July, and he cried, and he said, "I said things to you that I can't take back. I told you that you weren't enough. I told you that Richard was better. And I'm sorry, Dad. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry." I sat with that for a while. I didn't tell him it was fine. It wasn't completely fine. Those words had landed somewhere real inside me, and they had left a mark, and I think it would have been dishonest to pretend otherwise. But I told him what I believed. I told him that people believe the story in front of them, and sometimes it takes time and distance to see the whole picture. I told him that being someone's son does not require you to be perfectly fair, and I had never expected him to be a judge between his parents. I told him that I loved him, and I told him to come see me in Portugal. He did in September. He brought his girlfriend, a lovely woman named Camille, who had never been to Europe. I took them on the river cruise that goes into wine country. I showed Marcus the bakery on my corner, the card games with Hector, the Tuesday language class. I showed him what 63 looks like when you stop performing for an audience that has already made up its mind about you. On his last night, Marcus sat on my balcony with a glass of port wine which he'd never tasted before and immediately loved, and he looked out at the Douro and said, "Why didn't you do this years ago?" I told him the truth. I said I hadn't known I was allowed to. People ask me sometimes, people who know pieces of this story, whether I feel like I won. And I want to be careful with that word, because winning was never the point. I did not engineer Beverly's comment at that reception. I did not tell anyone to investigate the Wake Forest property. I did not orchestrate any kind of reversal or reckoning. I sat in Porto and drank coffee and learned Portuguese and walked along the river every morning and built, piece by piece, a life that was actually mine. The things that happened on their own. I think there is a lesson in that. Not a triumphant one, not a satisfying movie version lesson where justice arrives on schedule and everyone gets exactly what they deserve, but a quieter one, when you stop spending your energy trying to be enough for someone who has already decided you aren't. You free up a remarkable amount of yourself, and you can use that for language lessons, for river walks, for rediscovering what your own voice sounds like when no one is asking you to keep it down. Diane and Richard, as far as I know, are still married. Whether that marriage is happy or complicated or something in between, I genuinely do not know, and I genuinely do not spend much time thinking about it. What I do think about is the morning light in Porto, the way it comes through the old shutters in my apartment at around 7:15 and hits the wooden floor in a particular way that I have tried and failed to photograph adequately. The smell of the bakery on the corner. The sound of Fernanda laughing at my pronunciation of the word obrigado, which apparently I have been saying with a very specific North Carolina inflection that she finds endlessly entertaining. I think about Marcus, who calls me now every Sunday, who told me last month that he's thinking about visiting again in the spring, this time for longer. I think about Tanya's kids, who I video call every Wednesday and who have decided, with the complete certainty that only small children possess, that Portugal is the coolest place in the entire world because their grandfather lives there. I am 63 years old. I wake up when I want to. I walk along the river. I drink good coffee for 80 cents, and I am, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where I am supposed to be. If you're sitting somewhere right now wondering whether it's too late, whether you've waited too long, given too much, whether there's anything left on the other side of a life that stopped fitting you, I want you to hear this from someone who has been in that exact chair. It is not too late. The bakery is still on the corner. The river is still moving. And there is, I promise you, a version of your life that is still waiting for you to show up for it. You just have to be willing to take the first step. And if that first step happens to be a one-way flight across the Atlantic, well, the coffee's pretty good over here.